I am Audrey Reynolds, 32 years old, and until last Thursday, I was a senior compliance specialist at Aerotech Industries. For 8 years, I poured my heart into ensuring our aerospace components met every safety standard. Then our new CEO decided to eliminate my position during a company-wide meeting in front of everyone. He had no idea that my certification was the only thing keeping production running legally. His face when the $100,000 per hour shutdown began is something I will never forget. If you are watching this, let me know where you are viewing from. Have you ever witnessed corporate karma unfold in real time? Like and subscribe to see how I turned the tables on the executive who tried to humiliate me. My professional journey started with a Master of Science in Engineering from Georgia Tech. I specialized in compliance for aerospace manufacturing, a field that requires extraordinary attention to detail. After graduation, I spent 2 years getting additional certifications, including the highly sought-after Federal Aerospace Compliance Officer designation. This FACO certification is crucial in our industry. It authorizes individuals to sign off on components that go into aircraft, spacecraft, and defense systems. Without this sign-off, parts cannot be legally installed or sold. I joined Aerotech Industries fresh out of my certification program. Aerotech is not a household name, but in the aerospace industry, we were known as a reliable supplier of critical components for commercial and military applications. Our parts end up in everything from passenger jets to satellite systems. When I started, the company had about 400 employees and was led by Thomas Winters, a former engineer who understood the technical aspects of our business. The company culture under Thomas was demanding but fair. Everyone understood that our work could literally be a matter of life and death. A single failed component at 30,000 feet can have catastrophic consequences. That knowledge created a culture of meticulous precision. We took pride in our perfect safety record and 0 product recalls. For 6 years, I thrived in this environment. I rose from junior compliance officer to become the lead compliance specialist for our most sensitive military contracts. I built a small but effective team of 3 other compliance officers who reported to me. We worked closely with the engineering and production teams to ensure that every specification was met, every tolerance was within limits, and every safety regulation was followed to the letter. Everything changed 18 months ago when Thomas announced his retirement. The board brought in Victor Harrington as the new CEO. Victor came from a consumer electronics background with a reputation as a cost cutter who could improve margins quickly. From his first day, it was clear that Victor saw safety and compliance as cost centers rather than essential functions. Samuel Wright was my direct manager, a thin, nervous man who had been with the company for 15 years. He was technically competent but lacked the confidence to stand up to aggressive personalities. When Victor started questioning our compliance budget, Samuel would nod along despite knowing better. Patricia Alvarez was the HR director who had joined 6 months after Victor. She had worked with him at his previous company and was brought in specifically to help with his vision of streamlining operations. With her perfectly styled hair and designer suits, she moved through the building with a clipboard, constantly evaluating which departments could be reduced. Leonard Coleman was our company lawyer, a tall, serious man with salt and pepper hair who had been with Aerotech for over a decade. Unlike Samuel, Leonard was known for being straightforward and uncompromising when it came to legal matters. He rarely smiled but was respected for his professionalism. My closest ally at work was Jasmine Taylor, a production engineer who understood the value of our compliance work. We often had lunch together, and she would keep me informed about changes on the production floor that might impact safety or regulatory requirements. Over the 18 months of Victor's leadership, I watched our company culture deteriorate. Weekly emails celebrated cost reductions and efficiency improvements, but morale plummeted. The first round of layoffs came 3 months after Victor arrived, with 20 people from support functions losing their jobs. 6 months later, another 30 employees were let go, including 2 members of my compliance team. I was told to maintain the same level of oversight with half the staff. More concerning were the subtle pressures to expedite compliance reviews. What once took 3 days was now expected to be completed in 1. When I raised concerns about rushing these critical safety checks, Victor dismissed them as bureaucratic foot-dragging. The breaking point came when I discovered that some of our military contract components were being manufactured with substitute materials that had not been properly tested or approved. I documented the issue and sent a formal report to Samuel, Victor, and Leonard. Samuel looked terrified when I mentioned it. Victor called it a minor deviation and said the alternative material had similar properties. Leonard asked for more documentation but took no immediate action. For weeks after that, I felt a target on my back. Victor would walk past my desk without acknowledgement. Meetings I normally attended were suddenly rescheduled without my knowledge. Patricia began requesting unusual reports about the time allocation of my remaining team members. Rumors of another round of layoffs started circulating, despite the company announcing record profits the previous quarter. The tension in the building was palpable. People whispered instead of talking normally in the break room. No one wanted to be seen as not being busy. I updated my resume but hoped my specialized role would protect me from the cuts. I was the only person in the company with the specific certification required for our military contracts. I thought they would at least have a transition plan before letting me go. I was wrong. The quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. in the main conference center. These meetings typically covered financial results, upcoming projects, and employee recognition. Sometimes there would be announcements about organizational changes, but these were usually presented as positive moves for growth. I arrived early and took a seat in the middle rows where I could see the presentation slides clearly. The room gradually filled with colleagues from all departments. Jasmine sat next to me, showing me pictures of her new puppy on her phone. The atmosphere was tense, but not unusually so given the recent rumors. Victor strode in at exactly 10, flanked by Patricia and the executive team. He wore his signature navy blue suit and red tie, projecting confidence and authority. After perfunctory greetings, he launched into a presentation about our financial performance, emphasizing revenue growth and profit margins. Then came the slide titled, Strategic Realignment. Victor cleared his throat. To maintain our competitive edge in a challenging market, we have identified redundancies in our organizational structure that need to be eliminated. This streamlining will allow us to be more agile and responsive to customer needs while optimizing our operational costs. Corporate speak for layoffs. My stomach tightened, but I still believed my role was essential. Victor continued. The following team members will be transitioning out of the company effective immediately. He began reading names from a list. Each name fell like a hammer in the silent room. People from accounting, marketing, engineering. After each name, security personnel would approach the person and escort them out. Then he said it. Audrey Reynolds, compliance. The room blurred. I felt Jasmine freeze beside me. My name echoed in my head as I tried to process what was happening. Surely this was a mistake. I was the primary certification holder for our most important contracts. A security guard I knew as Mark approached my row. Miss Reynolds, please come with me, he said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. The walk to the aisle felt endless. Hundreds of eyes followed me. Some colleagues looked shocked. Others quickly averted their gaze, as if unemployment might be contagious. My face burned with humiliation. My legs moved mechanically, carrying me forward while my mind raced. Mark led me not back to my desk but directly to the HR department. Patricia was somehow already there, having slipped out of the meeting. Her office was prepared with termination paperwork neatly arranged on her desk. Please sit down, Audrey, she said with practiced neutrality. I know this is difficult, but we need to process your exit efficiently. There must be a mistake, I said, my voice sounding distant even to myself. I am the primary FACO certification holder for our military contracts. Those production lines cannot operate without someone in my position. Patricia gave a thin smile. Management has evaluated all roles and determined that your functions can be distributed among other team members. Aerotech is an at-will employer, and we are exercising our right to terminate employment. The phrase at-will employment hit me like a slap. 8 years of dedication reduced to a legal technicality. Who will sign off on the compliance documentation, I asked, still unable to believe what was happening. That has been addressed in the transition plan, Patricia replied vaguely. Now, I need you to sign these papers acknowledging receipt of your termination notice and understanding of the confidentiality agreements you are still bound by. I read through the documents in a daze. 2 weeks severance pay for 8 years of service. Immediate termination of health benefits. A reminder of the non-disclosure agreement I had signed when I was hired. Through the glass wall of Patricia's office, I could see other shell-shocked employees being processed by HR staff, assembly line terminations. As I mechanically signed the papers, Patricia continued her rehearsed speech. You will have 30 minutes to collect personal belongings from your desk. Mark will accompany you. Company devices and badges must be surrendered before you leave the premises. I nodded numbly, unable to form words. As Mark escorted me to my desk, we passed the cubicle area where my team sat. They looked up with expressions of shock and confusion. I wanted to explain to say goodbye properly, but Mark gently directed me forward. Jasmine intercepted us by the water cooler. This is insane, she whispered urgently. What about the FACO certification? The Meridian project is in final testing this week. Apparently they have a transition plan, I replied, repeating Patricia's vague assurance. Jasmine looked skeptical. Nobody else here has that certification. It takes months to get approved. Mark shuffled uncomfortably. I am sorry, but we need to keep moving. At my desk, I was given a cardboard box for my belongings. 8 years of professional life reduced to a few personal items. Photos, coffee mug, reference books. My company laptop, phone, and security badge were placed in a separate container for IT to process. Mark stood uncomfortably close as I packed under instructions not to let me access my computer or take any company documents. Colleagues walked past quickly, some mouthing sorry or giving sympathetic glances, but no one stopped to talk with the security guard watching. The final indignity was the walk through the main lobby. Rather than using a side exit, terminated employees were paraded past reception, where visitors and delivery personnel could witness our disgrace. I kept my head high, but inside I was crumbling. In the parking lot, I placed the box in my trunk and sat in my car. Only then did the tears come hot and furious. I had given this company 8 years of my life. I had worked weekends and holidays to ensure deadlines were met. I had caught and prevented safety issues that could have cost lives. And this was how it ended, with a public dismissal and a cardboard box. I drove home in a blur, the radio playing unheard as my mind cycled through shock, disbelief, and humiliation. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the humiliation over and over in my mind. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of my colleagues watching as I was escorted out. I heard Victor's voice announcing my name with no more emotion than if he were reading a grocery list. By 3 a.m., I had progressed from shock to a hollow sadness. By 5 a.m., that sadness was giving way to anger. By 7 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, thinking more clearly than I had in the past 24 hours. Something did not add up about my termination. Anyone with basic knowledge of aerospace manufacturing regulations would know that a company cannot simply fire their primary compliance certification holder without a transition plan. The FACO certification is not just a piece of paper. It is a personal authorization granted after extensive background checks, testing, and industry experience verification. The certification is tied to the individual, not the company. As the designated FACO holder for Aerotech, I was personally responsible for certifying that components met all safety and regulatory requirements. My signature on compliance documents was what allowed those components to be sold and installed in aircraft. Without an active FACO holder, production would legally have to stop on all certified lines. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Federal Aerospace Safety Administration website. I logged into my certification portal and reviewed my status. There it was, my active certification listing me as the primary compliance officer for Aerotech Industries on 14 different component categories. The regulations were clear: any change in employment status had to be reported within 24 hours. I sat back and considered my options. I could ignore this requirement, but that would be a violation of my professional ethics and potentially illegal. I had signed a legally binding agreement when I received my certification. I was obligated to report any change in my employment status. But I also knew exactly what would happen when I filed that report. The FASA system would automatically flag Aerotech as non-compliant. Without an active FACO holder, the company would receive an immediate stop work order for all regulated production lines. Everything would grind to a halt until they either got me back or found another certified compliance officer to take over. I thought about the Meridian project that Jasmine had mentioned. It was a $20 million contract for critical navigation components. The final testing was scheduled for this week with delivery next week. A delay would trigger penalty clauses in the contract. I thought about the military contracts, which had even stricter requirements and harsher penalties for non-compliance. Those production lines could not operate at all without proper certification. I thought about Victor and his cost-cutting mission. Had he even bothered to understand the regulatory requirements of the industry he was now leading? Or had he simply seen my department as an expense to be reduced? I picked up my phone and called Harold Simmons, my former professor, who had become a mentor in the industry. Harold had worked for the FASA for 20 years before moving to academia. "Audrey," he said warmly when he answered. "What a pleasant surprise." The story spilled out of me, the public firing, the humiliation, the cavalier attitude toward compliance. Harold listened quietly until I finished. "And you have not filed your status change yet?" he asked. "No, I wanted to understand the implications first." "The implications are exactly what you think they are," Harold said. "Without an active FACO on staff, Aerotech cannot legally continue production or testing on any certified components. The moment you file that change, the system will flag them as non-compliant." "Is there any way around that?" I asked. "They could apply for a temporary exemption, but those are rarely granted and take weeks to process. They could rush another employee through certification, but even expedited, that takes at least 30 days. Their only immediate option would be to bring you back or contract with a certified consultant as an interim measure." I sighed. "I do not want to be vindictive, Harold. I am angry about how I was treated, but I do not want to intentionally harm the company." "This is not about vindictiveness, Audrey. This is about regulatory compliance and safety. You have a legal and ethical obligation to report your change in status. What the company failed to plan for is not your responsibility. In fact, failing to report would put your own certification at risk." After we hung up, I spent another hour researching the regulations. Harold was right. I had a clear obligation to report my change in employment status. The consequences for Aerotech were not my concern. They should have thought of this before terminating me without a transition plan. With a deep breath, I logged into the FASA portal and navigated to the employment status section. I filled out the simple form, indicating that as of Thursday I was no longer employed by Aerotech Industries. I included the termination documentation provided by HR, then I clicked Submit. The system immediately generated an acknowledgement, status change recorded. Notification sent to previous employer regarding certification status. I closed my laptop and went to make fresh coffee. I was not taking revenge. I was simply following the rules, the same rules I had spent my career upholding. If Victor had bothered to understand those rules, he would never have terminated me the way he did. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "Something big is happening. Emergency meetings being called. Production stopped on multiple lines. What did you do?" I typed back. I followed the regulations. Filed my certification status change as required. 3 dots appeared as she typed her response. "Oh, place is in chaos. We'll keep you posted." I sipped my coffee and waited. The ball was now in their court. The aerospace industry takes safety seriously, and for good reason. When products fail at 30,000 feet or in orbit, people die. The regulatory framework exists to prevent such tragedies, and the automated systems enforcing these regulations are designed to be uncompromising. The moment I submitted my status change, the Federal Aerospace Safety Administration system sent automatic notifications to Aerotech Industries and all relevant project managers. Simultaneously, the system changed the status of all production lines under my certification from compliant to certification pending, triggering immediate stop work orders. In practical terms, this meant that testing, production, and shipping of components on those lines had to cease immediately. Machinery worth millions of dollars sat idle. Hundreds of workers suddenly had nothing to do. Contracts worth tens of millions of dollars were in jeopardy of missing deadlines. The financial impact was severe and immediate. Industry analysts estimate that a full production stoppage at a facility like Aerotech costs approximately $100,000 per hour in direct losses. This figure includes idle equipment paid but unproductive labor and potential contract penalties. It does not include the longer-term costs of damaged customer relationships and lost future business. My phone buzzed continuously with updates from Jasmine. Security just rushed to the production floor and shut everything down. Samuel is running around looking like he is about to have a heart attack. Victor called an emergency executive meeting. He is furious. IT department trying to override the system shutdown. No luck. Leonard from legal just went into the executive meeting. Looked grim. I could picture the scene clearly. The production floor would be in disarray with workers standing idle beside silent machines. Supervisors would be frantically calling for guidance. The executive suite would be in panic mode as they realized the full implications of what had happened. 3 hours after I submitted my status change, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code matched Aerotech's location. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Audrey, this is Samuel Wright." My former manager sounded exhausted. "We have a situation here that requires your expertise." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding your position. The company would like to bring you in for a consultation on an urgent compliance matter." "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "I was publicly fired and escorted from the building by security. That seems pretty clear to me." Samuel sighed. "I know, and I am truly sorry about how that was handled. It was not my decision. But we have a critical situation now with the production lines, and you are the only one who can help us resolve it quickly." "What exactly are you asking me to do, Samuel?" "We need you to come in tomorrow morning to discuss reinstating your compliance oversight. The company is prepared to offer compensation for your consultation time." I took a deep breath. "I will need that in writing, Samuel. An official letter from the legal department specifying exactly what you are asking and what compensation is being offered. I am not walking back into that building on a verbal request." "Of course," Samuel said quickly. "I will have Leonard draft something immediately. We really need to resolve this by tomorrow. The production stoppage is significant." After hanging up, I received another text from Jasmine. "They just calculated the losses. Over $2 million today alone, and the Meridian contract has a $5 million penalty clause if we miss next week's deadline." I smiled grimly. This was not revenge. This was simply the regulatory system working as designed. Safety and compliance are not optional extras to be cut when convenient. They are fundamental requirements that protect lives. An hour later, an email arrived from Leonard Coleman with an attached letter. The language was formal but urgent. Aerotech requested my expert consultation services regarding a time-sensitive compliance matter at a rate of $500 per hour with a minimum 4-hour engagement. The amount was insultingly low given the situation. They were losing $100,000 hourly but offering me $500 to solve their problem. Moreover, the letter carefully avoided any mention of reinstatement or the circumstances of my termination. I replied with a counterproposal. My consultation rate was $2,000 per hour, with a minimum 8-hour engagement payable in advance. Additionally, I required a signed statement acknowledging that my termination had created the compliance issue. I would be available tomorrow at 10 a.m. if these terms were accepted. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Leonard himself this time. "Miss Reynolds, I received your counterproposal. The rate is higher than anticipated. My rate reflects the urgency and importance of the situation, Mr. Coleman. I understand the company is currently losing approximately $100,000 per hour. My expertise seems quite valuable in that context." There was a pause before Leonard spoke again. "The company is prepared to meet your financial terms. However, the statement regarding your termination is problematic from a legal standpoint." "Then we do not have an agreement," I said simply. I am not interested in helping the company pretend that this situation was not entirely of its own making. Another pause. "I will speak with the relevant parties and get back to you." By evening, I had received a revised agreement meeting all my terms, including a carefully worded acknowledgement that the current compliance situation resulted from personnel changes made without adequate regulatory transition planning. It was corporate speak, but it was an admission of their mistake. I signed the agreement and prepared for tomorrow's meeting. I was not going in with the intention of being vindictive, but I was also not going to be a doormat. They needed me far more than I needed them, and it was time they recognized that fact. As I reviewed the production documentation that Leonard had included with the agreement, I noticed several concerning irregularities beyond just my termination. Material substitution skipped quality checks, expedited testing protocols. It seemed that Victor's cost-cutting had gone much further than just reducing headcount. These were potentially serious safety violations that would need to be addressed. I set my alarm for 7 a.m. and tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow would be interesting. I arrived at Aerotech Industries at precisely 10 a.m. the following day. The security guard at reception looked surprised to see me checking his list twice before calling for clarification. Eventually, he issued me a visitor badge, a stark contrast to the employee badge I had worn for 8 years. "Someone will be down to escort you," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. 5 minutes later, Samuel appeared looking like he had not slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew. "Audrey, thank you for coming," he said, extending his hand. "We really appreciate your willingness to help with this situation." I shook his hand firmly. "I am here as a professional consultant, Samuel. Nothing more." He nodded, leading me to the elevator. There is a meeting in the executive boardroom. All the key stakeholders are there to discuss the situation. As we walked through the building, I noticed the unusual quiet. Normally, the production floor would be humming with activity, but now it was eerily silent. Workers stood in small groups talking in hushed tones. Several recognized me and gave subtle nods of acknowledgement. The executive boardroom was on the top floor, with glass walls offering a view of the production facility below. As Samuel and I approached, I could see that the room was packed. Victor sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with anger. Patricia from HR sat to his right, her expression carefully neutral. Leonard the lawyer was reviewing documents with intense concentration. Several board members I recognized were present, as well as the heads of major departments. All conversation stopped when I entered. Leonard stood and approached me. "Miss Reynolds, thank you for coming. As you know, we have a critical compliance situation that requires immediate attention." Victor interrupted. "Let us cut to the chase. What exactly did you do after your termination?" Leonard shot him a warning glance. "If I may, Mr. Harrington, Miss Reynolds is here as a consultant to help resolve the current situation." He turned back to me. "Please have a seat. We have prepared an overview of the affected production lines." I sat down and accepted the folder Leonard offered. Inside were status reports, showing all 14 production lines under my certification now labeled as non-compliant, with red stop work orders attached. As you can see, Leonard continued, the regulatory system has placed holds on significant portions of our production capacity. Our understanding is that this resulted from the change in your certification status. "That is correct," I said calmly. "Federal regulations require that I report any change in employment status within 24 hours when I hold an active FACO certification." I simply complied with that legal requirement. "You knew what would happen," Victor said accusingly. "You knew it would shut down production." Mr. Harrington I replied evenly, "Every executive in this industry should understand basic regulatory requirements. My certification is not transferable. It is tied to me personally, as the qualified individual. When you terminated my employment without a transition plan, this outcome was inevitable." One of the board members, an older woman I recognized as Elizabeth Morgan, leaned forward. "Was there no continuity plan for this certification?" Leonard cleared his throat. The compliance department had submitted multiple requests for additional certified personnel over the past year. These requests were not approved due to budget considerations. All eyes turned to Victor, who shifted uncomfortably. "Those requests were for redundant positions. We need to run lean to remain competitive." "And how competitive are we now with all production stopped?" Elizabeth asked pointedly. Victor's face reddened further. He turned to me. "So you filed this report knowing it would damage the company. That could be considered sabotage, Miss Reynolds." Leonard interjected quickly. "That is not an accurate characterization. Miss Reynolds had a legal obligation to report her change in status. Convenient timing, though, was it not?" Victor persisted, his voice rising. "Filed first thing Monday morning for maximum impact." "I filed within the required 24-hour period," I stated. "The timing was determined by when you chose to terminate my employment." Victor stood suddenly, his chair rolling backward. "This is clearly retaliatory action. You intentionally damaged this company because you were upset about being laid off." He was shouting now, his face purple with rage. He pointed his finger at me accusingly. Do you have any idea what you have cost us? Millions in lost production, contract penalties, we could sue you for damages. As Victor advanced around the table toward me, Leonard jumped up and grabbed his arm firmly. Sir, stop, he said urgently. She is the only one who can get these production lines running again today. The room fell silent. Victor froze, his arm still in Leonard's grip. Leonard spoke quietly but intensely. Mr. Harrington, Miss Reynolds is here as a consultant to help resolve the situation she was legally required to create. Any threats or accusations against her will only prolong our current crisis and could expose the company to additional legal liability. Leonard turned to the board members. Miss Reynolds holds the only active certification that can reinstate our compliance status immediately. Without her cooperation, we are looking at a minimum 30-day production stoppage while we process emergency certification for another employee. The implication hung in the air. 30 days of production stoppage would cost the company approximately $72 million, not counting contract penalties and lost business. Elizabeth Morgan spoke again. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to gather our thoughts. Miss Reynolds, would you like some coffee while we organize our approach to resolving this matter? It was a diplomatic lifeline, allowing everyone to step back from the confrontation. I nodded. Coffee would be nice, thank you. As people began filing out of the room, I noticed the dynamics shifting. Board members were clustered together, speaking in hushed tones while glancing at Victor. Patricia looked professionally concerned, but also calculating, perhaps already considering her own position if Victor fell. Samuel appeared simply relieved that the shouting had stopped. Leonard approached me as the room emptied. Miss Reynolds, I apologize for Mr. Harrington's outburst. Would you be willing to discuss potential solutions with me privately? I nodded. That would be fine. As we left the boardroom, I could see Victor in intense conversation with Elizabeth Morgan and 2 other board members. From their expressions, the discussion was not going in his favor. Leonard led me to a smaller conference room down the hall. Unlike the fishbowl boardroom, this one had solid walls and a door that closed firmly. He gestured for me to take a seat at the small table. I appreciate your professionalism in handling this situation, he said once we were seated. Mr. Harrington is under considerable pressure, but that does not excuse his behavior. Thank you, I replied, simply waiting for him to continue. Leonard folded his hands on the table. Let me be direct. The company needs to resume production as quickly as possible. We understand that requires reinstating your compliance oversight in some capacity. That is correct. We are prepared to offer you reinstatement to your previous position with a 10% increase in salary and a formal apology for the manner of your termination. Would that be acceptable? I shook my head. It would not. My previous position was eliminated because compliance was not valued by current leadership. Returning to that same vulnerable position with a modest raise does not address the fundamental issue. Leonard nodded thoughtfully. What would address the issue from your perspective? First, I need to know if the board and executive team understand what actually happened here. This was not just a procedural error. This was a systemic failure to recognize the critical nature of regulatory compliance in our industry. I believe the board is coming to that understanding very quickly, Leonard said dryly. Then let me outline what would be necessary for me to consider returning, I said, leaning forward. I would require a director-level position with direct reporting to the board on compliance matters. I would need budget authority for a properly staffed compliance department, including at least 3 additional certified officers to prevent this situation from recurring. I would need a significant compensation package reflecting both the critical nature of my role and the circumstances of this reinstatement. And I would need assurance that Victor will have no authority over compliance decisions going forward. Leonard raised his eyebrows slightly. Those are substantial demands. They are necessary conditions for proper regulatory compliance, I countered, and far less costly than the alternatives you are facing. May I ask about the compliance irregularities you noted in your review of the documentation? Leonard asked, changing tack slightly. I found multiple concerning issues, I said, sliding a notepad toward him where I had listed specific problems. Material substitutions without proper testing. Abbreviated quality checks. Inspection protocols being shortened. These are all serious compliance violations that go beyond just my termination. Leonard reviewed the list, his expression growing more troubled. Were these issues documented previously? I submitted formal reports on all of these matters. They were acknowledged but not addressed. Leonard sighed deeply. I see. That creates additional liability concerns. He stood up. I need to discuss your terms with the board. Would you be willing to wait here? Of course, I replied. I am being paid $2,000 an hour to be here today. He gave a small, tired smile. Indeed you are. While Leonard was gone, Jasmine texted me, board members in and out of meetings. Victor looks like he is about to explode. What is happening? I replied, negotiations in progress. Nearly an hour passed before the door opened again. This time, Elizabeth Morgan entered with Leonard and another board member I recognized as Robert Chen, the chair of the audit committee. Miss Reynolds, Elizabeth began, we have reviewed your terms and have a counter-proposal. She slid a document across the table. I read it carefully. They had accepted most of my demands with some modifications. The position would be Senior Director of Compliance and Safety, reporting to a newly formed board committee on regulatory affairs. The budget was approved as requested. The compensation package included a substantial salary increase, stock options, and a signing bonus that conveniently matched the severance package I would have received from a proper termination. The only significant change was regarding Victor. Rather than explicitly limiting his authority, the document established a formal approval process for any changes to compliance protocols requiring board committee sign-off. This is acceptable, I said after careful consideration. With one addition. I want a formal review of all the compliance issues I have identified with a written plan for remediation to be completed within 30 days. Elizabeth nodded. That is reasonable and necessary. Is there anything else? I would like to speak with my former team immediately to begin the transition back to compliant status. The production stoppage is costing the company approximately $100,000 per hour. I see no reason to delay resolution once we have an agreement. Agreed, said Robert Chen. We can have the formal paperwork prepared while you begin the technical process of reinstating compliance certification. Within the hour, I had signed the agreement and was meeting with my former team. They were surprised but visibly relieved to see me. I walked them through the immediate steps needed to update the FACO certification in the federal system. The actual technical process was simple. I logged into the FASA portal, updated my employment status to reflect my new position, and submitted the certification reinstatement forms. Within minutes, the system began changing production line statuses from non-compliant back to active, allowing work to resume. As we completed the process, Jasmine appeared at the door of the compliance office. The production floor is spinning up again, she said with a grin. You should see the relief on everyone's faces. How is Victor taking it? I asked quietly. Jasmine's grin widened. He was asked to leave the executive meeting about an hour ago. Patricia escorted him to his office. Rumor is he is clearing out his personal items. As word spread that production was resuming, the mood throughout the building lightened noticeably. Workers returned to their stations. Supervisors began rescheduling assignments. The silence of the shutdown was replaced by the normal hum of activity. Later that afternoon, Leonard found me in my new office, which was still being set up. The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning, he informed me. They have asked for your documentation regarding the compliance issues you identified. I will have it ready, I promised. Also, he added with the ghost of a smile, I thought you should know that Mr. Harrington has decided to pursue other opportunities effective immediately. The board will announce an interim CEO tomorrow. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Change can be difficult but necessary. Indeed, Leonard agreed, particularly when the alternative costs $100,000 per hour. As he turned to leave, he paused. For what it is worth, Miss Reynolds, I advised against your termination from the beginning. Some lessons are learned the hard way. Some lessons should not need to be learned at all in this industry, I replied. The regulations exist for a reason. A point that is now abundantly clear to everyone, Leonard said, closing the door behind him. 1 month after what became known internally as the certification incident, I sat in my new office reviewing reports from my expanded compliance team. The view from the executive floor was certainly better than from my old cubicle, but the responsibility was weightier too. My new role as Senior Director of Compliance and Safety came with challenges I had not anticipated. I now had a team of 8 people, including 3 newly hired FACO-certified specialists. I had budget authority and a direct reporting line to the Board Committee on Regulatory Affairs. I also had the attention of every department head, who now understood that compliance was not an optional extra. The announcement of Victor's resignation had come as no surprise to anyone. The interim CEO was Douglas Franklin, a longtime board member with actual aerospace experience. His first company-wide email had emphasized a commitment to safety quality and regulatory compliance. The contrast with Victor's cost-cutting messages could not have been more stark. Patricia had also left the company 2 weeks after Victor, replaced by a new HR director who was working to rebuild morale and trust. Samuel remained as a department manager, somewhat chastened by the experience but more willing to stand his ground on important issues. The compliance issues I had identified were being systematically addressed. Some production lines had been temporarily shut down voluntarily to correct problems before they became regulatory violations. It was costly in the short term but essential for long-term stability and safety. Jasmine had accepted my offer to join the compliance team as a technical liaison. Her engineering background and production floor experience proved invaluable in implementing new protocols that maintained safety without unnecessarily impeding workflow. As for me, the journey from public humiliation to professional vindication had been transformative but not without emotional cost. The first weeks after my return had been awkward. Some colleagues avoided me, perhaps embarrassed by their silence during my termination or intimidated by my new authority. Others sought me out to express support or share concerns they had previously been afraid to voice. I still occasionally woke up reliving the moment when my name was called out for termination. The feeling of shame and helplessness would wash over me anew. But these episodes grew less frequent as I rebuilt my professional identity in my new role. The industry took notice of what happened at Aerotech. I received inquiries from compliance officers at other companies seeking advice on how to ensure their certification processes were properly structured. A trade publication even requested an interview about the importance of regulatory compliance in aerospace manufacturing, though I declined to discuss the specific events at Aerotech. What surprised me most was how the experience changed my approach to workplace relationships. Before, I had been intensely focused on the technical aspects of my job, sometimes at the expense of building stronger professional networks. Now I understood that technical excellence alone was insufficient. Organizational awareness, strategic communication, and relationship building were equally important skills that I needed to develop. The painful experience had forced me to recognize my own worth in a way that might never have happened otherwise. I had always taken pride in my work, but I had allowed the company to define my value. When they discarded me so casually, it shattered that framework and forced me to create my own measure of professional worth. That was perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. On a Friday afternoon, exactly 6 weeks after the incident, Elizabeth Morgan stopped by my office. "How are you settling in, Audrey?" she asked, taking a seat across from my desk. "Well, I think," I replied. "The new compliance protocols are being implemented on schedule, and we have cleared all the outstanding regulatory issues. Yes, I saw your report to the committee. Very thorough." She paused. "But that is not what I meant. How are you doing personally?" The question caught me off guard. "I am adjusting. It has been a significant change." Elizabeth nodded. "What happened to you was inexcusable. The board should have exercised better oversight of Victor's decisions. For that, I am truly sorry." "Thank you," I said simply. "You know, in 40 years in this industry, I have learned that our greatest professional challenges often reveal our greatest strengths," she continued. "You turned a moment of tremendous personal injustice into an opportunity to improve safety and compliance across the entire organization. That speaks volumes about your character." After she left, I reflected on her words. The experience had indeed revealed strengths I did not know I possessed: the courage to stand my ground, the confidence to demand what I was worth, the clarity to separate professional requirements from personal feelings. The most profound lesson was about the true meaning of professional integrity. It was not just about following rules or meeting requirements. It was about standing firm on principles even when it was difficult or painful to do so. Sometimes following the rules and standing your ground is the most powerful response to injustice. I turned to look out my office window at the production floor below, now humming with proper compliant activity. Every component moving through that facility would eventually become part of an aircraft carrying hundreds of people or a satellite providing critical services. The regulations I enforced were not bureaucratic obstacles to be circumvented. They were essential safeguards protecting lives. The path that brought me here had been painful, but the destination was worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone who would ever rely on the products we made. Have you ever faced a moment when standing up for what is right felt like the hardest thing to do? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences about workplace challenges and professional growth. Share this with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground in a difficult situation. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes our greatest setbacks reveal our greatest strengths.